Hi, everyone. I'm Rose White, a statewide economics reporter at MLive, but I am doing some election coverage tonight, and we're just going to give everybody an update on where things stand now that polls have closed across most of Michigan. There are a few upper peninsula counties that will be voting until 9 p.m. because they are in the central time zone. So election officials say there's been high voter turnout today and things have been going smoothly. And we've got reporters covering all of the major statewide races across the state, including Simon Schuster, who is covering Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Detroit, Jordan Hermini at the Tudor Dixon Watch Party in Grand Rapids. Ben Orner is keeping an eye on the Attorney General race in Novi, and Taylor Desormeaux is reporting on the abortion rights proposal in Detroit. So we're first going to hear from Ben to just kind of talk about what people can expect to see as results start coming in. There's a lot of absentee ballots that were requested again this year. So what are some things that people should watch for with the election results?
So I think the biggest thing that people should watch for is that election results are not going to come quickly. Michigan only allows 2 days of pre-processing of absentee ballots. These millions of mail ballots that come in for the election, and clerks can only take them out of the envelope and check them. They don't actually tabulate the results. So clerks have been tabulating those ballots all day, but there are millions of them. So it's going to take some time. And the Secretary of State's office says expect a sort of 2020-like atmosphere. And if you remember from 2020, a big thing was it seemed like Republicans were doing really well, and then Democrats made what looked like a comeback. That is probably going to happen again this year because polling has found that yet again, Democrats are favoring the absentee ballot while Republicans are favoring the in-person vote. The Secretary of State's office says we're going to have full unofficial results by 24 hours after polls close, so like tomorrow night. But when news organizations and analysts are able to call and predict who wins what races when, whether it's tonight or tomorrow morning, we don't know that yet. So the biggest thing is be patient.
Yeah, it seems like the overarching message there is just that it's normal for there to be a delay. So what are just some of the safety messages and just sort of the messaging coming from the Secretary of State's office to the people of Michigan about what that delay means and just kind of some reassurances that they're offering?
Yeah, so Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson has said, be on the lookout for folks who use that gap in time between when polls close, which was a few minutes ago, I believe, to when results get called. People may use that gap to either maybe claim victory prematurely or use that time and point to this, they call it the red shift or the red mirage, Republicans looking like they have a lead that they don't actually have. People may use that time to spread conspiracy theories, to claim that Republicans are actually farther ahead than they really are. So be on the lookout for that. Remember, be patient. That's the biggest thing. But as for things that happened today, there really weren't a lot of disturbances or problems at polling places today. There was one problem I think people should be aware of in Detroit, where some precincts had a data error with their e-poll books, which is like the list of people who are registered to vote. And the Republican candidate for Secretary of State, Christina Caramo, as well as former President Donald Trump, were spreading theories that this isn't an error. This is due to election fraud. They're trying to turn people away to vote. That's not the case. The Secretary of State's office and the Detroit Elections Department have said like this was like a legitimate error. It was small, it was contained, it was fixed quickly, and across the state, no matter what the small problem was, the Secretary of State's office has said everyone who has wanted to vote has voted.
Great. And just in the most recent update from the Secretary of State's office, they said the issue in Detroit was resolved quickly and no voters were turned away.
Yes.
Which is a sign that things are moving went smoothly. Great. Well, thanks, Ben. Now we're going to turn to the race between Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Tudor Dixon. So we're going to hear from Simon, who's at a watch party in Detroit, and Jordan, who's in Grand Rapids. So to start, what are the scenes you guys are seeing there? Simon, let's turn to you first. What's the atmosphere there?
Yeah, well, so essentially the scene here is more or less a non-scene. People haven't necessarily been allowed into the election venue yet, but there's a long list of speakers. It's important to note that the Democrats here are sort of having a unified party where Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and Attorney General Dana Nessel may be making appearances here as well. But I think the big question on everyone's mind is, given the fact that, as Ben noted and so many other colleagues have sort of tried to emphasize, that it's really unlikely that we're going to have a definitive race call tonight. It's certainly possible, but this party is due to end at around midnight. And so if we don't have a definitive answer or not, it may be that the governor does not even speak tonight. So a lot of folks are waiting to see, whether we're going to have something where both of these candidates are saying, things are looking good for us or bad, or we're holding out hope, or if they're just not going to speak at all and we're going to have to reconvene in the morning. So really, these next few hours are going to be crucial in seeing how decisive this race may be, or if it's going to be a nail biter down to the finish.
Yeah, and in a little bit of the opposite, I'm in Grand Rapids at a Tudor Dixon watch party right now. But Matt DePerno, who is the Republican Attorney General candidate, Christina Caramo is the Republican Secretary of State candidate. They have their own little events going on in Novi, I believe, right now. And so, we are seeing Republicans spread out across the state. Dixon has a number of lawmakers here who are in Michigan's legislature currently turning out for her. I saw a previous gubernatorial candidate, Mike Brown, if you guys remember, he came in support for Dixon. Her running mate, Hernandez, is Shane Hernandez, a former lawmaker himself. Also saw him around tonight. There has not really been any definitive timeline as to when we can expect to hear Dixon to speak, if we can expect Dixon to hear to speak. I have heard 10:30, 11, but again, I've also heard that is all incumbent on what we can see from polling and what we can see from race results, because that is really going to dictate when Dixon speaks, if Dixon speaks, etc. Not too sure, whereas Simon said that we have until midnight at the Whitmer campaign. I'm not too certain where the deadline is for the Dixon campaign, as that has also not really been announced yet, but by and large, people are super pumped to be here. The media pen on its own, we had to ask for another full banquet table. There's 3 banquet tables just of media on one side. There's an entire riser of broadcast individuals in the back of this very large banquet hall at a Marriott in Grand Rapids. And the atmosphere here is really, really positive. There are a lot of people here who are really hoping to kind of get this momentum into race results. So.
Yeah, thank you. And Simon, you've been following this race very closely. Where did things stand as we entered election day between the two candidates?
Yeah, so obviously this is a very close race. But also we have polls that are showing drastically different things depending upon which one you consult. Some had Whitmer in the last few days as up as much as 11 percentage points, and others had them tied with even Dixon in a slight lead. So I think that there's a lot of uncertainty as to what we're going to see as things roll in. Obviously, the higher turnout, it appears has been higher across the board. And so there is a lot of sort of uncertainty as to what those initial returns are going to look like. Obviously, it's important to note that with 1% here, this is not a good representative sample of sort of where the night is going to go, because this is likely from a heavily Democratic area. But at the same time, I think that there's a large amount of uncertainty. But when you look at the candidates' closing arguments, Whitmer has really tried to tie issues of the economy and abortion together, saying that abortion itself is an economic issue, and then also trying to defend her own record on education, because this has sort of been the centerpiece of Dixon's campaign. Whereas Dixon, if you look at sort of her stump speech and what she's been talking about on the campaign trail, she has centered everything and sort of framed it in Whitmer's response to the pandemic and how that has led to sort of a faltering economy and bad schools. And so as you see them bring these closing arguments to the fore, I think that Dixon is really hoping that this race is a referendum on Whitmer's performance during the pandemic. Obviously, that has its own divisiveness. Some, I think, voters who are supporters of the governor really think that she did a good job being cautious and, extending the state's stay-at-home order, whereas others, sort of hold this as a grievance that has brought them forth and kept them motivated far into this election cycle. So it's going to be really interesting to see what sort of staying power that issue had once the results come in tonight.
Great. Thanks, Simon. And Jordan, you've also been covering the state legislature pretty closely. Can you just talk to us about what the balance of power is in the state government and just what's on the line for those races?
So we have had a Republican-controlled legislature so far. The Senate, however, Democrats in the Senate are making a huge push. The Michigan Senate has retained a Republican majority since the 80s. I mean, I do not remember a time when there was not a Republican majority in the state Senate in Michigan. And that could change this year. There's a very strong showing financially out of Democrats out the gate to try and retake some areas. Especially, you have to remember, we just went through a redistricting cycle, which did make several districts throughout Michigan far more competitive in our House and our Senate. So you're seeing a push out of Senate Republicans. You're seeing key areas. I believe there's a Senate District 12, which is Pamela Hornberger is facing off against State Senate or Representative Pamela Hornberger is facing off against Representative Hertel. It was a Democrat. You're seeing massive buys from the Senate Republican Campaign Committee. Her and State Senator Mark Huizenga. Sorry, there's a lot of names to remember right now, but Huizenga, between Hornberger and Huizenga, the Senate Campaign Committee committed about $7 million worth of spending overall. Over half of that went to those two specific races. So you can tell that there is a heavy emphasis by Republicans. They want to keep control. I believe that they're, feeling a little bit of pressure from Democrats now. In the House, it's a bit of a different story. There is obviously a huge push by Democrats. They believe that the path to a majority runs through the downriver districts. And you are not, I shouldn't say you're not really seeing, but once again, Democrats came out really strong in fundraising, but towards the end of the year, towards the end of the campaign cycle, we started to see Republicans with far more cash on hand, which enabled them to continue pushing advertising buys into and up until Election Day. If you hadn't noticed, potentially, I have in my own neck of the woods, my advertising had considerably skewed Republican, and that just goes to show how much gas was left in the tank for Republicans to continue making these purchases. And it's going to be a tough fight to the end.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to keep track of. So thanks for keeping tabs on all those races. Simon, Jordan, we appreciate your insight. Good luck covering these watch parties, and we will see what happens at the gubernatorial race.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah. Now we're going to head to Taylor, who is at a watch party for Proposal 3, which is very contentious in the state of Michigan and probably one of the most highly watched issues on the ballot. So, Taylor, give us an overview. If Proposal 3 passes, what would it do?
Yeah, hi, Rose. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
So we're here in downtown Detroit. People are just starting to filter in here. This is the Proposal 3, Reproductive Freedom for All. So if it passes, basically, it makes abortion legal in Michigan up until fetal viability. And there's a lot of eyes on this race, not just in Michigan, but really nationwide. There's 5 states that have an abortion-related proposal on the ballot: Michigan, California, Vermont, Kentucky, and Montana. But arguably, none of them are more consequential than this one, because Michigan has a 1931 law on the books that could go back into effect that would ban abortion in almost all instances in Michigan. So right now, abortion is legal, but just temporarily because of a court ruling. If voters vote no on it tonight, it's very likely that it could become illegal in the coming days. And something that's key with this as well is that a proposal like this, that it would become a constitutional amendment in Michigan, that's very hard to change. So if it was something that the legislature put through, the next legislature could always change it, right? But with the way it is through this proposal, if it passes tonight, abortion is going to be a constitutional right in Michigan, and it's going to be extremely hard to change.
And if it fails, where will abortion rights stand in Michigan, and what will the impact be on Michiganders?
Right. So temporarily, it would still be legal. It was going to be up to judges and lawmakers. Like I mentioned, that the 1931 law in the books is what a lot of people are pushing for to become the law of the land again. And it almost was the summer when Roe versus Wade was overturned. But thanks to Governor Whitmer and some other people kind of making some last minute pushes, it was held up. So right now, abortion is legal, but it very well could not be in the coming weeks or coming months. So it'll be something interesting to watch. And, Simon mentioned earlier that Governor Whitmer has really been pushing the abortion issue. And that's in a lot of her campaign literature on commercials and things like that. And there's a good reason for that, because this abortion proposal has been shown to be very popular in a lot of the polls. It's up by maybe 10 percentage points in most of the polls, whereas Governor Whitmer, like you mentioned, is maybe only up 5 percentage points or even less than that. So I think the governor is trying to associate herself with the Proposal 3 here. And conversely, Tudor Dixon has gone out and said, hey, you can vote in favor of Proposal 3 and still vote for me, which seems kind of odd, but it shows that everyone knows there's a lot of support for this. So the watch party here goes till midnight. We'll see if we have a result by then or not. If it's obviously, it looks like a slim lead so far, but it's very early on. So we'll see as more votes come in how late in the night this could go. But I think everyone would be quite surprised if Proposal 3 does fail.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue I think a lot of voters are keeping an eye on. So, Taylor, we appreciate you covering it and keeping us updated on where things stand on that proposal. And now we're going to go back to Ben to give us an overview of the Secretary of State and Attorney General's race. So, Ben, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel is up for re-election. So what have we seen between her and her competitor?
Yeah, so this has been really one of the most heated and the closest races in Michigan this election cycle. We've seen personal insults from both of them. DePerno, for one, has called Nessel a quote-unquote groomer, taking out of context a joke she made that she was making this joke about how Republicans use quote-unquote wedge issues like drag queens reading to kids in school to push an agenda that lacks policy. DePerno and so many people in the Michigan Republicans have used that to say that Nessel is pushing this radical agenda. She wants drag queens in schools. It's not true. It was a joke, but that's probably something you've heard from DePerno. So he's running a very culture war centric campaign. Also talking a lot about violent crime, which is up in some respects in Michigan. And Nessel, she's touted, the accomplishments that she's had. She's pointed to consumer protection wins, sexual abuse investigations, and she's really tried to paint DePerno as a threat to democracy, because DePerno, if you remember, 2 years ago was the lawyer who was furthering challenges to elections in Antrim County. And in Antrim County, if you remember, that's where a glitch in an election system initially saw Joe Biden ahead of Trump in a very rural red county. That was quickly explained and fixed, but DePerno led a legal effort to say that it was some part of like a widespread fraud, very much in the lane of election denialism. He really hasn't talked about that much on the campaign trail, but it is part of I don't know, something to watch for.
Yeah. And the other race that you're keeping tabs on is the Secretary of State. And on one hand, we have Jocelyn Benson, the incumbent, who navigated getting a bunch of absentee ballots out during the pandemic and a lot of the challenges to that election. And then we have Kristina Karamo, who is an election denier. So give us some of the nitty gritty details on what we've seen in the competition in that race.
Yeah, so this is the big part of Secretary of State. This is the key thing. Jocelyn Benson has been one of the most visible, quote unquote, defenders of democracy when it comes to these false claims of a stolen election after 2020. She's testified to Congress. She's been very active in taking on that role. Christina Caramo, meanwhile, was a poll challenger in 2020 at the TCF Center in Detroit, the sort of epicenter of the mail-in ballot false claims of widespread fraud. She turned she was a I don't know. She sort of made the rounds in right-wing media circles. She then was able to win candidacy to Secretary of State. There's so many things. She obviously denies that the 2020 election was legitimate. It was. A Republican-led state Senate report found that it was, and so many audits, hundreds of audits, have said that it was legal. And one thing I will point out is that in the past, I think it was a couple of days ago, literally yesterday. I'm sorry, yesterday, she lost a lawsuit claiming in Wayne County, claiming that because there is widespread mail-in ballot fraud in Detroit, that they should stop counting mail-in ballots for this election. And the judge wrote just a fiery opinion on that, which you can read on mlive.com, basically saying that Caramo's lawyers brought no evidence, they had entirely baseless claims, and Democrats have criticized her for, saying that it was an illegitimate lawsuit trying to sow doubt into the election process. One thing with Caramo, I will say today, she furthered those claims of widespread fraud in Wayne County. She was tweeting today saying that the e-poll book issue that we talked about earlier, she was saying that is proof of widespread fraud. It is not. It just isn't. And I asked Meshawn Maddock, the co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party, just a few minutes ago in another segment, will candidates claim victory, or Republican candidates claim victory before races are called? She said no, but then the caveat saying we're going to win anyway. So that's no. People are worried about that Matt DePerno and Christina Caramo would declare victory if in-person votes showed that they were ahead before those lagging Democratic absentee ballots come in. So that's the word from the co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party. The candidates aren't going to do that. The other thing that she told me is that she had just gotten off the phone with President Trump, who was furthering on his platform, Truth Social, he was furthering Caramo's, Detroit widespread ballot e-poll book thing. And Trump was sowing doubt, saying that people may need to protest because of it. She told Trump, don't worry about Michigan. Everything's fine. Voting is going fine. So while you may see Trump or Caramo pushing these conspiracies in Detroit, the co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party is telling doubters, including the former president, don't worry about Michigan. Voting's fine. And she obviously thinks and hopes that Republicans will come out victorious today.
Great. Ben, I appreciate you giving us those very up-to-date details. He literally messaged us 2 minutes before he got on that he had just talked to Meshawn Maddock. So this is very fresh off the press. So Ben, thank you for your time. We look forward to getting more updates from you on both those races, which are also pretty pivotal in Michigan. And I think a lot of people are watching those closely as well. So there's also congressional races on the ballot this year. And so we're going to zoom in on one that's been a nail biter in the 7th district. So Jordan, can you tell us about why incumbent Elissa Slotkin has faced such tough competition from Tom Barrett?
Well, for starters, Michigan's new 7th congressional district is the most expensive congressional race in the country right now. This is truly a toss-up seat. If you go back and you look at data from the 2016 presidential election, Donald Trump won that area by 4 percentage points, but Biden took it in 2020 by just 1. So this is truly as close to a middle of the road, back and forth kind of congressional district as you can get. And when you look at both of these candidates, they're both individuals with military backgrounds. Barrett is a currently serving state senator for Michigan. Slotkin is now running for another term in office. Before that, she worked for the CIA. But so this is a race, like I just said, this is probably going to be as close to a truly neutral, Republican, non-Democrat shoe-in sort of race. And the spending definitely reflects that. On top of that, this new district, if I'm remembering correctly, encompasses all of Livingston County, which is far more Republican than her old district, which only contained a portion. So that is definitely going to bolster Barrett's numbers. And again, like I said earlier, when we looked at spending, Republicans, by and large, were entering the races coming in with far more cash to burn, cash to spend, and far more of a way to get in front of voters. Now, that's not to say Slotkin hasn't been doing the same thing. I live in the 7th Congressional District. I would argue and say that I've seen a fair equal amount on television of both of their advertising. I know I've gotten a litany of mailers. So up and until the wire, this was going to be a race that they were going to try and press on voters. And, it's going to bear out tonight, however that goes.
Yeah, it's definitely it's one district, but that is something that will have a big national impact if it flips and could change the makeup of the House of Representatives in Washington. And there's another pretty competitive congressional race in West Michigan that Brian McVicker has been keeping tabs on. So we're going to go to Brian to talk about the 3rd congressional district. So Brian, who's on the ballot in that district?
Hey, Rose. We got Republican John Gibbs is on the ballot. I'm at his watch party tonight down in Byron Center. And then we've got Democrat Hillary Scholten on the ballot. So it's been a very tight race here in the 3rd congressional district, which encompasses, cities of Grand Rapids and then heads out to the Lakeshore with city of Muskegon and northern Ottawa County with the city of Grand Haven. And so that's a little bit about who's on the ballot there. And it's a very close race. And talked to some voters today a little bit about gas prices. We heard a lot about abortion rights. It's a very close race today.
Yeah. And Jordan mentioned redistricting in the 7th district. How has that affected what we're seeing in the 3rd district?
Yeah, so the prior district was much more conservative leaning. So basically, it had portions of Ionia County, Berry County, a very much more deep red part of the state. So this is been rated a toss-up race, or even leaning left really towards giving Hillary the advantage. She would have won the district Biden won this district by about a little bit over 8 points back in 2020. But there's a lot of headwinds, I guess, going on this year, gas prices, inflation, those things. So it looks like it's going to be a real nail biter of a race tonight.
And Brian, you've also been out and about talking with voters in the district. What are you hearing from people who've been at the polls?
A real mix. There's a lot of things that are going on that I've heard today a little bit about. Hillary supporters, really front and center for them is election. They are really upset with the way the former president handled the 2020 election results on January 6th. John Gibbs was endorsed by former presidents, so they don't want to see that kind of philosophy happen again. I heard that a lot from them. But on the other hand, from a lot of Gibbs supporters had kind of echoed, I guess, some of the big Republican themes this year: rising gas prices, inflation, crime. Those are a little bit of, I guess, kind of what's on the mind of his voters this year. Some of his voters, I talked to a couple people who were grudgingly going to vote Gibbs. They didn't like that he was an election denier, but they basically, a couple folks I talked to were liked his stance on abortion. So he was very much 100% pro-life candidate. So that was a driving factor for those folks.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting race to watch, and we'll see what happens there and how redistricting could impact who's in the seat in January. Brian, thank you for checking in with us, and we'll keep getting updates from you throughout the night. Next, we'll just hear from Taylor to talk about the two other big proposals that are on the ballot this year, statewide proposals. So Taylor, what's Prop 1? Give us the lowdown on that.
Yeah. So Proposal 1 has two different kind of components to it. So there's term limits is the first part. So right now, anybody can run to be in the Michigan House, and those are 2-year terms, and you can get 3 of those. So that would be 6 years. And then you can run to be in the Michigan Senate. Those are 4-year terms, and you can do that twice. So you add all that up, you get 14 years. If this passes, if Proposal 1 passes tonight, you'll only be able to do 12 years total, but you can spend those 12 years however you want between the two chambers. So you can do 12 in the House or 12 in the Senate, or 6 and 6, or I guess it wouldn't work that way. But anyways, yeah, you can spend them however you want. So that would kind of shrink term limits a little bit. The second part is financial disclosure. So basically, you would be seeing the governor, attorney general, secretary of state, lieutenant governor, and the legislature. They would all be required to submit a form every year that basically says, talks about their finances. And a good example I like to think of, Rose, let's say that you're a senator in Michigan, and you secretly on the side, you are an investor in a pizza company. And now let's say you're pushing forward a bill. Hey, let's give all pizza company owners a tax break. Now in Michigan, we wouldn't know that you're doing that to gain benefit for yourself, a conflict of interest. If you're a good person, you would say, hey, I'm also a pizza owner. But so this would be something that would just make things a lot more clear. It would hopefully clear up conflicts of interest. And Michigan and Idaho are the only 2 states that don't have any kind of financial disclosure requirements, so we're really far behind in the transparency aspect. So that's another big part of Proposal 1 as well.
Great. And just for the record, I don't have any pizza investments.
It's not too late.
Unfortunately. So give us an overview of Proposal 2. What's on the ballot there, and what are voters deciding on that?
Yeah, so Proposal 2 is all about voting rights. And some of them, you may be confused because we already have some of them, but what Proposal 2 does is it solidifies them. So there's been some Republicans in the legislature that want to take away certain voting abilities and rights in Michigan, and this would kind of solidify them. So some examples, we would have 9 days of early voting. So you could go into your clerk's office and vote the 9 days before an election. That would be required that they'd be open. Also, a big one is right now, if you go to the polls and you forget to bring your photo ID, you can sign an affidavit saying, hey, I forgot my ID, but this is who I am. And they will go back and check your signature to make sure that it matches your signature on file. And if it does, then your vote counts. This would solidify that. That's been a big talking point among Republicans, something that they've been trying to get rid of. Other things that it includes, it would require absentee drop boxes so that you can turn in your ballots. It would only allow election officials to conduct post-election audits. And it require canvassing boards to only certify results based on official records of votes cast. So basically, there's these board of canvassers that say, hey, they are the ones that kind of certify and make the election official, but we don't want them to be just voting or putting their thoughts out on a hunch. We want them to only be doing it on the official records of votes cast, is what Proposal 2 supporters are saying. So that's kind of a few of the things. You could read more on mlive.com about some of the different things that Proposal 2 includes, but it's generally something that's trying to give people an opportunity to vote more. And all 3 of these proposals have been very popular. We'll see how they turn out. Proposal 1, I forgot to mention, is very interesting just because it's so bipartisan. Like, there was a group of Democrats and Republicans that really came together on this proposal. And you don't see that very often. So that one's definitely the most bipartisan, but all of them have been shown so far in the polls to be favored. But we'll have to watch the election results tonight to see where they fall.
Great. Well, thanks, Taylor. We appreciate your knowledge and insight on all 3 of those proposals, and good luck at the watch party. And that kind of brings us to the end of our overview. We will be having results updated at mlive.com as they come in. As we've kind of reiterated, and it's important to mention, full results might not be here until tomorrow afternoon, but we will get them as they come in and give you all the most up-to-date information that we can on some of those big races that we talked about: the governor's race, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and all 3 proposals. Thanks for tuning in, and we will keep you updated throughout the night.